Call the meeting to order. If we can stand and say the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you everybody for coming. We obviously will not have any visitors wishing to sign in to speak tonight. I would first like to, since it's really to everybody in the room here, say thank you for all of your hard work these past couple weeks, because it is very clear and evident to me and to everyone around this table and stuff how much work you put in, especially talking to friends and stuff in other districts and how prepared we are and how envious they are of us. So thank you to all of you. Thank you to Mr. Pinella for all your hard work. I do recognize you guys have been here on weekends and late and everything else, so thank you. So
Here, here.
Agreed.
we have no written communication. I don't know if we've had any reports since the last meeting. No?
No.
So we can move right into the superintendent's report.
Thanks. We originally had another item on the agenda, but thought it would be best just to slim down the agenda and focus on the essentials. So we will jump right into the most recent update from Mrs. Bazinski on our budget. Welcome.
Thank you. This budget was prepared and finalized last week on Thursday. And last week Thursday was a much different world than today is. And today is unknown of a world of what we'll have in the future. So we have this projection for you. It's the information that we know to be true now and where we think we're going. We do have more opportunities to make changes, but there will be things that we've had set since our first presentation that may need to change due to the circumstances that we're living. And we're just going to need to be flexible moving forward into next year to do our best to meet the needs of all of our staff and students and our community. So this is our March update, and we will be reviewing our anticipated program and staffing changes. And I put that first because our revenue assumptions and our expenditure assumptions incorporate these program and staffing changes. So we'll review that. Similar to our normal format, all areas that are changed from our last presentation are highlighted in blue, and everything that has remained unchanged is still in black. So program and staffing changes, we have 4 retirements that have been incorporated into this budget, 1 administration retirement and 3 teacher retirements, which yielded salary breakage of approximately $220,000. All 4 of these positions will be replaced, so there are no reductions in this area. For actual staffing changes, all of these changes are based on student enrollment and programming needs, so there are some additions and some reductions, and they result in a net change of approximately $30,000. So our additions include a 1.0 gen ed teacher at the 3rd grade level in Smallwood, and that is based on our enrollment projections for next year and maintaining the class sizes that we feel are best for student learning and achievement. Due to increases in our ELL population and needs as our kids move up through the grade levels, we believe that we'll need some additional support in middle school for those students. We are adding an assignment to an existing teacher, so they will have a 6th assignment versus hiring another person. We'll continue to monitor this throughout the year and into next year, and that might be an area in the future that we need to increase support with additional personnel. We're also adding into the budget a 1.0 FTE social worker, and that is our family support center. So we added that position this year, but we added it after we had done our initial budget presentation, so it wasn't included in next year yet. So we've made that adjustment. On the reduction side, we are reducing 0.47 of an FTE of a science teacher in the high school. That will not result in the loss of any classes that we're offering. We feel that we can absorb that by changing our class sizes a little bit, but still maintaining the levels that we feel are appropriate. We have 2.0 FTE, so 2 full-time one-on-one teacher aides in the high school. And those are aides that are assigned to specific students, and those students' needs have changed. One student has changed program, and the other student is graduating, so those positions are not needed. For the teacher aide positions in particular, we often have vacancies in those positions, so at this point, we're not necessarily anticipating someone being out of work, but we feel that we have a vacancy that just may not need to be filled, and people will move around. We have a 1.0 special ed teacher assistant in Smallwood that will be a reduction, and that is due to student needs and program changes for our kids. That's another position that we often have vacancies, so we are looking to have that be a vacancy that just doesn't need to be filled. And the reduction of our special ed after school program, which is housed at Smallwood. Last year, we moved from our in-house program to JFK, and we had a handful of students that we were servicing in our program, but weren't necessarily appropriate for the JFK model. So we continued on a very small scale our after-school program. This year, we're down to only 2 students, and we're happy to be able to replace that program with a new partnership with People Inc., which is very similar to the program that we have at the secondary level in the high school. So Mr. Belisle has worked with People Inc. to expand that program to the elementary level, and that will be a benefit for our students. It is a free program to our families, so there won't be any tuition, and they will be able to accept more students than we were able to accept. So it really is a win-win. On the flip side, we'll look in the on the revenue side when we get to it. There's a slight reduction in our revenues because we did have some income for that program, so the two of them offset each other a little bit. Other program additions that do not add staffing are our digital literacy course at the middle school, which will be offered to our middle school 7th graders, and our full inclusion special education classroom pilot program. So we will have 1 classroom in Smallwood and 1 classroom in Windermere that will pilot a fully inclusive model with a gen ed teacher and a special ed teacher in the room for the full day. So we're looking forward to that. That was a program that I know Mike and a lot of his staff were interested in implementing, but this gives us the opportunity to pilot it, 1 classroom in each building, to make sure that it works, that we're happy with the outcomes, and that we're meeting the needs of all of our students to the best of our abilities.
And that's compared to currently where we have a special education teacher for half the day and a TA for the other half the day.
So in our revenues, we had a slight change to our property tax levy. We did submit that with the changes to the BOCES capital exclusion. We were hoping that it would have a little bit more of an impact to our tax levy because we had about $50,000 to $55,000 worth of an exclusion that we could apply. But the requirement wasn't just to add the exclusion for this year. We were required to go back to last year and edit it and add the exclusion in last year, even though it wasn't available to us. And then the only increase we had was the net from what last year's exclusion would have been to what this year's exclusion was. So it ended up being just over $2,000 of an increase for us. I was hoping that we would either add it this year, so we'd have the full amount, or by editing last year's and not using it, it would have been rollover for this year and we could have added it, but they didn't allow it as rollover. So that was that. We do not have any state aid updates at this time, but we are hoping for updated state aid runs in April, and we'll take a look at that when those come out. On revenues, we are showing a projected increase of about 5% or 290,000. And the significant change in this area is the $10,000 that we reduced for our after-school revenue, because we have reduced the program as well. But we've also made a pretty significant change to our interest rates. So the 95,000 is a decrease from last year's budget to this year's budget, but it's actually about $137,000 of a difference from what we had in our last presentation, because we were showing an increase based on the rates we were looking at. Ms. Williams, our treasurer, sent Mr. Pennella and I the T-bill rates that she had as of today, and our last T-bill that we confirmed or locked in was at 1.3%. Today, a 1 month is 0.07 and a 6 month is 0.2. So when we first started our investment plans almost a year ago, we were in the high ones, almost to twos, and now we're back down into the 0.2. So we do have a T-bill renewing, and we will leave it liquid and put it in our money market account and hope that the interest rates bounce back up a little bit before we invest that again. So overall, our property tax cap allowable percentage is 0.955%, which is $37,239,000. It's about a $350,000 increase. We modified our miscellaneous revenues for the $10,000 for the after-school program revenue and our interest earnings, which leaves us with an overall revenue increase of about 2.66%, $61,742,000. For expenditures, we were able to use, utilizing the reductions in our salary breakage and some of our program changes, our personnel increase is about 2.85%. And it was closer to 3.7 at our last budget presentation. So our goal is always to keep that lower, preferably under 3%, so we're happy to see that. It's about an increase of $825,000. Our ERS rates and our TRS rates are staying somewhat, well, our ERS rates are staying steady at 14.6%. And we have a decrease in the budget of about $40,000. There was a little bit excess in that line this current year, so we lowered that a little bit. And we also had some changes due to breakage from employees resigning or retiring that we were able to capture a little bit of savings there. And our TRS rate is an increase of $270,000. The rate is still set at 9.5%, but due to the breakage that we had from our administrator retirement and our teacher retirements, we were able to decrease that increase a little bit from our last presentation. Our workers' compensation premiums came in, and the consortium decided to increase the rates 1%, but because our experience rating is improving, which is a 3-year average of experience, we have a premium decrease of just over $5,000. There were no changes to general support, and on the instruction side, we made some changes in our special education tuitions. We were estimating an increase in private tuitions of about 5%. We reduced that slightly to a 4% increase and modified a little bit of contract service, which leaves us with an increase of $60,000. The last presentation it was about $85,000. No changes at this time to BOCES, transportation, or debt service, which leaves us with an overall budgetary increase for expenditures, or overall budgetary percent change for expenditures of just over 4%, or $2.4 million, with an overall appropriation budget of $62.5 million. Overall, our revenues are just under 62 million at 61.7. and our overall expenditures are about 62.5, which leaves us with a budgetary gap of 836,000. That's a decrease in gap of 234,000 from our last presentation, and we do still have some areas that we can look at to help close that gap. We will look at our state aid when it comes in April. We're still hoping to see an increase in foundation aid because the runs that we received previously from the governor included our BOCES aid and expense aids rolled into our foundation aid. We were anticipating those expenses in expense-based aids, so if we separate those out, we had very little, if any, increase in our foundation aid. So that's an area that we're still hoping to see be increased. We always have the opportunity to try to look at our expenditures and make spending reductions if that's the area we need to look at to close the gap. We have not allocated our fund balance at this point. This current year and the prior year, we allocated about $420,000. We have the ability to increase our levy above the cap if that's a direction that the board is interested in looking. And we still have the ability to appropriate additional funds from our reserves. So our next budget update is April 7th. And if the state aid runs come in at the beginning of April or the very end of March, as we hope they will, this will give us time to make those adjustments and be ready for the next update. During the time between now and then, we'll also be looking at any of our expenses or revenues that may change due to the current state of our outbreak and the needs of our students and community.
Great, thank you.
Does anybody have any questions?
I mean, I don't want to go too much into it, but I do just have one question. When is the county sales tax collected? Is that already in the bank, or is that something we get over time?
We receive it quarterly. So we submit a report to Erie County that's due September 1st of each year, and it's based on the average daily attendance of all of our students in all of our buildings from the prior year. And that is what determines our portion of the sales tax that is collected. So we're on track this year for what we have budgeted through the first 3 payments that we've received. But we don't know what the last payment will look like. But that is an area that we'll be watching and considering for adjustment for the April presentation.
What's the money market rate?
I would have to look that up for you. I don't know that off the top of my head.
I also think that Ms. Blaine should explore any of the other things that we can look at as far as short-term investments. Because the spreads have widened dramatically, so Treasury can be here and other stuff is here. So she needs to look at that.
Okay.
And that just happened.
Anything else? All right. Oh. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So
Gonna look
one
at our
other
capital
resolution that is on your agenda tonight that has a couple blanks in it is the discussion surrounding the establishment of a new capital reserve. So we currently have a capital reserve that has a maximum limit, funding limit of $500,000, and we were able to fund it partially this past year at $300,000. We have started the very, very preliminary work of gathering information of what might be included in a future capital project. But in order to go out to our voters with another project and be able to say that we're interested in moving forward with a project that has a limited impact, if any impact, on our taxpayers, we need to have reserves in place at the time of that approval in order to appropriate those funds. So that it has to at least be created. So the request to you is not to fund a capital reserve at any amount, only to establish it, to allow it to exist so that in the future, if there are funds available at the end of a school year, that we have a mechanism to place those funds, to hold them for the future, to be applied to capital expenditures so that we can limit the impact on our taxpayers while still maintaining our facilities through regular maintenance and enhancements due to any program changes that we may want or deem necessary. So the term is one blank that's on your agenda. The term is the length of time that a district can deposit into a capital reserve. It's not the length of time that you can have it, just the amount you can deposit into it. After the term expires, you can still maintain the reserve, you just can't put more money into it moving forward, but you continue to have it and then spend from it with voter authorization as needed. The maximum limit of the reserve is the amount of money that you can put into it. It's not the limit that the reserve can hold. So an example, if we had a reserve that had a $10 million limit and we had funded it to 9 million and then we used 4 million of it and there was 5 million left in the reserve, we would not have the authority to move another 5 million in to get it up to 10 because we'd already put 9 in. We'd only have authority to put 1 more million into it because it's not the amount in the reserve, it's the amount that was placed into it, regardless of how it was spent. So those are the two areas that are blanks. If the board's interested in establishing this reserve, our recommendation is that we would establish that with a 10-year limit, with a 10-year term, with a maximum limit of up to $10 million. And that amount comes from a very rough calculation of how much of a project we could do with that reserve without having an impact on our taxpayers. So currently our building aid is roughly 75%. So if we had a $10 million reserve, that would allow us to do a $40 million project without having any impact on our taxpayers.
But the reserve could also be spread across multiple projects.
It could.
So we may not be talking a $40 million project, one time, but a couple 20s or
Yep.
a bunch of lower denominations. So.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to poll the board about what what we'd like to do. I'm going to start with Mrs. Bazinski's recommendation of 10 years. And I don't see why we shouldn't do up to $10 million at this point, given the parameters that Mrs. Bazinski discussed. So if we want to go lower, we can, but I'll start with that and see what everybody's in favor of. Mr. Smith?
Okay.
Mrs. Aaron?
Okay.
Mr. Beville? Jean? Ladies, what about yourselves?
This is Jessica McLaughlin, and yes, I would agree with that. I agree also.
Ms. Scott? Okay. There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Again, every June, just to remind everyone, as we do fund balance anticipation in the late spring, we will have that conversation about what you may want to fund and to what limit, and then over the summer, as things are finalized with our books, we will then have our parameters for what we will be able to fund. So thank you for that.
Great. Thank you.
And since our audience is, as Mr. Steinley said, our administrative team, I do want to thank him for recognizing the work that's been done throughout the planning for this pandemic. It's certainly something we haven't seen in our lifetime. Obviously, it's nothing we've ever seen in education. And there's really no playbook. I was going back to those old grad school classes looking for the pandemic planning plan, and that wasn't there. So I was trying, being a social studies teacher, I was trying to look online, school superintendent leadership for pandemic. And I came up with something about the Spanish flu in 1918, so that wasn't very helpful. But we've really been relying on great collaboration and teamwork, and it's all been guided by, what is best for our kids and trying to make sure our kids have some continuity during this abnormal time, and our employees, because it's tough on them as well. So thank you to the team, and thank you for your recognition.
Great.
That's all I have tonight.
All right.
Thank you.
You'll need a motion for new business.
Make a motion for new business items E1, A through H, 2, A through D, 3, A through D, F, and G.
We have a second?
Can I just mention that in the one resolution, we did have blanks, and that we did agree on funding at $10 million and for 10 years.
That's for item H. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Vila, any discussion? All those in favor of approving new business items E1, A through H, 2, A through D, and 3, A through D, F, and G, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? You all set?
Yeah.
Okay. Motion carries. We will,
We have 2 follow-up items.
oh, yeah.
Ms. Kuzinski will discern the money market rate, and Ms. Williams will explore other types of investments.
Okay. We will need a motion to convene to executive session.
I'll make the motion to convene to executive session for matters pertaining to the employment of a particular person.
So a second?
A second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you, everybody. And nobody leaves, so we're all good.